The sickle blade caught the morning light as Brenna Oakheart swung it through the wheat, her green skin glistening with sweat, despite the autumn chill that had settled over the valley. She worked alone in the far corner of her father's sprawling farmland, the section closest to the woods where human neighbors rarely ventured, and she preferred it that way. At 22 years old, she had learned that her presence made people uncomfortable, even though her family had lived on this land for 3 generations, ever since her grandfather had been granted the deed after serving in the border wars. Her small tusks caught her lower lip as she concentrated on maintaining the rhythm of the harvest, her muscled arms moving with practiced efficiency. "You will slow your pace or injure yourself." Her father's voice rumbled behind her, and she turned to see Gareth Oakheart approaching through the golden stalks, his own green skin weathered by decades of sun and wind. His larger tusks were capped with silver, a sign of his status among the scattered orc families who had settled in the human territories. "The harvest will not wait for sentiment," Brenna replied, but she did ease her movements slightly, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "The storms last week damaged more than we thought. If we do not get everything in before the next rain, we will lose a quarter of the crop." Her father's expression shifted, and she recognized the look immediately. It was the same one he had worn when he told her mother had passed 3 winters ago, the same one when he had explained why she could not attend the village harvest festival with the human girls she had once called friends. Her stomach tightened. "There is something we must discuss," Gareth said slowly, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Come to the house when you finish this row." "Tell me now," Brenna said, driving the sickle into the ground and straightening to her full height. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, shorter than her father but taller than most human women, and she had inherited her mother's fierce directness. "Whatever it is, I would rather hear it here than in a house that will feel like a cage after you speak." Gareth sighed, the sound seeming to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Lord Matthias Blackthorn has made an offer. He wishes to solidify his holdings in the Eastern Territories, and he believes that an alliance with our family would demonstrate his commitment to unity between our peoples." The words took a moment to penetrate, and when they did, Brenna felt the world tilt slightly. "An alliance? You mean a marriage?" "He has asked for your hand," her father confirmed, and now he did meet her eyes, his own filled with something that looked like resignation. "He is a widower, respected by both humans and orcs in his region. He controls 3 townships and has the ear of the provincial governor. This could mean protection for our family, for all the orc families struggling to maintain their place here." "I have never even met him," Brenna said, her voice coming out flatter than she intended. "How old is he?" "That does not matter," Gareth said, but the way he said it told her everything. "He is established, powerful, and willing to take an orc bride when most human lords would sooner burn their estates than consider such a thing. Do you understand what this means? Do you understand how rare this opportunity is?" "Opportunity," Brenna repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "You speak as though you are offering me a chance to see the world, not selling me to a stranger old enough to be my grandfather." "I am securing your future," Gareth snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "I am making certain that when I am gone, you will not be cast out, that you will not lose this land that your grandfather bled for. Lord Matthias has promised that our holdings will be protected, that our people in this valley will have his patronage. One marriage, Brenna. One sacrifice for the good of many." She wanted to argue, wanted to rage at him that she was not a piece of property to be traded for political favor, but the exhaustion in her father's face stopped her. She saw how the years had bent him, how the constant struggle to maintain their place in a world that did not want them had worn him down to something fragile. He was not doing this out of cruelty. He was doing it because he was afraid. When? She asked quietly. He will come in 1 month to finalize the arrangements, Gareth said. The wedding would take place in the spring, after the planting season. He understands that we cannot leave the land untended. How generous of him, Brenna said, pulling the sickle from the ground and turning back to the wheat. I will finish this field and then we will speak no more of it today. I need time to think. Her father reached out as though to touch her shoulder, then seemed to reconsider. I am sorry, daughter, but this is the world we live in. He walked away, his footsteps heavy in the dry earth, and Brenna swung the sickle with renewed fury, letting the physical exertion drown out the screaming in her mind. She worked until her arms ached and the sun climbed toward noon, until the field around her was a sea of fallen grain waiting to be bundled and stored. Only then did she allow herself to stop, to sink down among the golden stalks and let the tears come. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until a voice said, "Are you hurt?" Brenna's head snapped up, her hand instinctively reaching for the sickle, but she froze when she saw the young man standing at the edge of the field. He was human, probably close to her own age, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell into his eyes. He wore the simple clothes of a farmhand, and he held his hands up in a gesture of peace. I did not mean to startle you, he said quickly. I heard you were short-handed for the harvest, and I was hoping for work. My name is Quinlan Yates. Brenna wiped her eyes roughly, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. We do not hire outside workers. My father and I manage the land ourselves. Quinlan tilted his head, studying her with dark eyes that held no trace of the fear or disgust she had learned to expect from humans. That seems like a poor business decision, especially with fields this size. But if you are certain, I will not trouble you further. He started to turn away, and Brenna found herself calling out, "Wait." She was not sure why she stopped him. Perhaps it was the loneliness that had been her constant companion since childhood. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that in a month her life would change forever, and she would never again have the freedom to make even small choices for herself. Whatever the reason, she stood and walked toward him, close enough to see the surprise flicker across his face. You are not afraid of me, she said, making it a statement rather than a question. Should I be? Quinlan asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice rather than challenge. I have met orcs before. My mother's cousin married into a clan in the Northern Territories. They were some of the kindest people I have ever known. It was such an unexpected response that Brenna actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. You are either remarkably open-minded or remarkably stupid. I have not yet decided which. Probably a bit of both, Quinlan admitted with a slight smile. But I am a hard worker and I am willing to accept fair wages. I have experience with wheat, barley, and rye, and I can handle most livestock. I am strong enough to be useful and smart enough not to break your equipment. Brenna considered him. They really were short-handed, and if she was going to be torn away from this land in the spring, she wanted to see it through one last good harvest. Her father would probably object to hiring a stranger, but her father had just sold her future to a man she had never met. She felt entitled to a small rebellion. Can you start today? She asked. Quinlan's smile widened. Immediately. They worked together through the afternoon, and Brenna was surprised to find that he had not exaggerated his skills. He moved through the wheat with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in fields, his hands quick and sure as he bundled the cut grain. He did not try to make conversation, seeming to understand that she needed the silence, and she found herself grateful for his presence in a way she had not anticipated. There was something soothing about working alongside another person without having to constantly guard her words or watch for signs of hostility. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Brenna finally called a halt. "That is enough for today. Come to the house and I will see about payment." "I would prefer to be paid at the end of the week if that is acceptable," Quinlan said, stretching his back with a wince. "I have a room at the inn in the village, but if you have a barn or shed where I could sleep, it would save me the walk each day." Brenna hesitated. Having him on the property would make things simpler, but it would also mean explaining to her father why she had hired someone without permission. Then again, her father had made a life-altering decision for her without permission. The scales felt balanced. "There is a loft above the horse barn," she said. "It is clean and dry. You can stay there." They walked back toward the main buildings together, and Brenna pointed out the boundaries of the property, the irrigation channels that fed the fields, the sections that would need to be plowed and reseeded in the spring. Quinlan listened attentively, asking intelligent questions, and by the time they reached the barn, she felt something almost like companionship stirring in her chest. "Thank you for the work," Quinlan said as she showed him the ladder to the loft. "I know it is not easy to trust strangers." "I have not decided if I trust you yet," Brenna said honestly. "But you have a strong back and you have not run screaming, which puts you ahead of most humans I have met. We will see how tomorrow goes." She left him to settle in and returned to the main house, where her father was preparing a simple dinner of bread and stew. He looked up when she entered, his expression wary. "I hired a farmhand," Brenna announced, washing her hands in the basin by the door. "He will help us finish the harvest." Gareth's eyebrows rose. "You did what?" "I hired someone. His name is Quinlan Yates. He has experience with grain crops and he is sleeping in the barn loft. If you have objections, you are welcome to voice them after dinner." Her father stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "You are angry with me." "I am practical," Brenna corrected, sitting down at the table. "You said yourself that we cannot afford to lose this harvest. One person cannot do the work of three, no matter how hard they push themselves. And if he is a thief, or worse—" "Then we will deal with it," Brenna said, accepting the bowl of stew he handed her. "But I do not think he is. He has kind eyes." Gareth muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer for patience, but he did not argue further. They ate in silence, the tension between them thick enough to choke on, and Brenna excused herself as soon as she had finished, claiming exhaustion. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about Lord Matthias Blackthorne and what kind of man would want an orc bride he had never met. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and Brenna was surprised to find Quinlan already awake and waiting by the barn when she emerged from the house. He had a bundle of tools slung over his shoulder and looked alert despite the early hour. "I thought we might start with the northern field," he suggested. It looked like the wheat there was ripest. They fell into a routine over the following days. Brenna and Quinlan would work side by side through the morning, break for a simple meal at noon, then continue until the light failed. Her father watched from a distance, clearly uncertain about the arrangement but unable to deny that they were making excellent progress. The harvest that should have taken weeks was condensed into days, and Brenna found herself looking forward to the work in a way she had not expected. Quinlan was easy company. He did not pry into her life or ask uncomfortable questions about her family, and he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on crop rotation and soil management. He told her stories about his travels through the region, the different farms he had worked on, the various characters he had met. He made her laugh, something that had become increasingly rare, and she caught herself smiling more than she had in months. One afternoon, as they took shelter from a brief rain shower under the eaves of the storage barn, Quinlan asked, "Why do you farm this land yourself? Most holdings this size have at least a dozen workers." Brenna considered how much to tell him. "My father prefers to keep to ourselves." "It is simpler that way." "Simpler or safer?" Quinlan asked quietly. She met his eyes and saw understanding there, not judgment. "Both. Humans do not generally want to work for orc landowners, and those who are willing often have ulterior motives. That must be lonely." "It is what it is," Brenna said with a shrug, but the casualness was forced. "I have the land, the sky, the seasons. It is enough." "Is it?" Quinlan asked, and the gentleness in his voice made her throat tighten. Before she could answer, the rain stopped as suddenly as it had started, and she stood quickly, needing to escape the intimacy of the moment. "We should get back to work. The day is not getting any longer." But that evening, as she lay in bed, she found herself thinking about his question. Was it enough? She had told herself for years that it had to be, that wanting more was a luxury she could not afford. But now, with the specter of Lord Matthias Blackthorne hanging over her future, she felt the weight of everything she had never allowed herself to want pressing down on her chest. The next week brought the first hard frost, and with it, a sense of urgency. They worked longer hours, racing to get the last of the crops stored before winter could damage them. Quinlan proved himself invaluable, his strength and stamina matching Brenna's own, and she caught her father nodding in approval more than once. On one particularly cold morning, Gareth even brought Quinlan a cup of hot tea and thanked him for his efforts, which was the closest thing to acceptance Brenna had ever seen her father extend to a human stranger. It was on a night 2 weeks after Quinlan's arrival that everything changed. Brenna had stayed late in the fields, wanting to finish bundling a section of barley before the predicted storm arrived, and Quinlan had insisted on staying with her. They worked by lantern light, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and when the last bundle was secured, Brenna felt a surge of satisfaction. "That is the last of it," she said, straightening and pressing her hands to her lower back. "Everything is in. We actually did it." "You did it," Quinlan corrected. "I just helped." "You did more than help," Brenna said, and she meant it. "I do not know how we would have managed without you. Thank you." Quinlan met her eyes, and something passed between them, some spark of recognition that made Brenna's heart stutter. In the golden glow of the lantern, his face looked different, less like the friendly farmhand and more like something that made her chest ache with longing. She saw him swallow hard, saw his hands clench at his sides as though he was restraining himself. "Brenna," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "Do not," she said quickly, because she knew somehow what he was going to say, and if he said it, everything would become impossibly complicated. "Please, do not say anything you cannot take back." "What if I do not want to take it back?" Quinlan asked, taking a step closer. "What if I have been trying to find the courage to say it since the moment I saw you crying in that field?" "Then you are a fool," Brenna said, but there was no heat in it. "I am not free, Quinlan. My father has promised me to someone else." The words dropped between them like stones, and she watched the color drain from Quinlan's face. "What?" "A lord from the Eastern Territories," Brenna said, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "He will come in 2 weeks to finalize the arrangements. The wedding will be in the spring." Quinlan stared at her, and she could see him processing the information, see the moment when understanding turned to something like anguish. "You agreed to this." "I did not have a choice," Brenna said, and finally the dam broke and the words came flooding out. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I want to be given away to a stranger who probably only wants me because I come with land and political advantages? But I am an orc, Quinlan. We do not get to choose our own paths." We get to be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance humans throw our way and hope it is enough to keep us safe. That is not acceptance, Quinlan said fiercely. That is subjugation. It is survival, Brenna shot back. And you do not get to judge it, because you will never understand what it is like to have every door closed in your face, to see humans cross the street to avoid walking near you, to know that no matter how hard you work or how good you are, you will always be seen as something less. You are right, Quinlan said quietly. I do not understand that, but I understand what it feels like to want something you can never have. I understand what it is like to meet someone who makes the rest of the world make sense and know that the timing is all wrong. Brenna closed her eyes, fighting tears. You need to leave, not tonight but soon, before he comes. It will be easier if you are not here. Easier for whom? Quinlan demanded. Easier for you to pretend this does not matter. Easier for your father to hand you over without guilt. Easier for me not to break, Brenna said, opening her eyes to meet his. Please, Quinlan, if you care about me at all, do not make this harder than it already is. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she saw a dozen emotions flash across his face. Then he nodded slowly, picking up his lantern. I will stay until the Lord arrives. I made a commitment to help with the harvest, and I keep my promises. But I need you to know something, Brenna Oakheart. You are not less. You are extraordinary, and any man who cannot see that does not deserve you. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the dark field with her heart hammering and tears streaming down her face. She had known Quinlan Yates for barely 2 weeks, but somehow he had slipped past all her defenses, had made her want things she had no right to want. And now, she had to find a way to push those feelings down and prepare to spend the rest of her life with a man she did not love. The next days were torture. Quinlan was polite but distant, speaking to her only when necessary and avoiding her eyes whenever possible. Brenna threw herself into the remaining farm work, preparing the equipment for storage, inventorying supplies, checking the stored grain for any signs of moisture or pests. Her father seemed to sense the tension but said nothing, though she caught him watching her with concern more than once. A week before Lord Matthias was due to arrive, a messenger came to the farm with a letter. Gareth read it with a carefully neutral expression, then handed it to Brenna. He is bringing a contingent of retainers and wishes to stay for 3 days, Gareth said. He wants to inspect the property and meet with the other orc families in the valley. This is good, Brenna. He is taking this seriously. Brenna read the letter, written in an elegant hand that conveyed nothing of the man's personality. He writes like a merchant negotiating a transaction. That is what marriage is among the nobility, Gareth said. You cannot expect romance from a practical arrangement. I am not expecting anything, Brenna said, folding the letter and handing it back. I will do my duty. That is all you can ask of me. Her father's face softened. I know this is difficult, but in time you may find contentment, even happiness. Lord Matthias is not a cruel man. He will treat you well. How do you know? Brenna asked. Have you met him? I have spoken with those who know him. He is fair in his dealings, generous to his tenants, and respected by his peers. That is more than many women can hope for in a husband. Brenna wanted to scream that she did not want to hope for scraps, that she wanted to be loved and chosen and cherished. But she swallowed the words and nodded, because there was no point in arguing. The decision had been made. That evening she found Quinlan in the barn, checking the horse's feed. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He is coming in a week, Brenna said finally. My father wants the house spotless and the grounds perfect. There is no more field work to be done, so if you want to leave now, I will understand. Quinlan set down the bucket he had been holding. Is that what you want? What I want does not matter, Brenna said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "It matters to me," Quinlan said, crossing the distance between them. "Tell me, Brenna, tell me honestly, if you could choose, if there were no consequences and no expectations, what would you want?" She should have lied. She should have sent him away with some polite fiction about duty and honor. Instead, she said, "You." The word hung between them, naked and vulnerable, and then Quinlan was closing the remaining distance, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Then choose me," he whispered. "Run away with me. We can go north to the territories where orcs and humans live together freely. I have friends there, people who will help us. We can start over." "My father," Brenna said, even as her body leaned into his touch. "The other families who depend on Lord Matthias's protection. I cannot abandon them." "They are not your responsibility," Quinlan said urgently. "You did not create this system of prejudice and fear. You should not have to sacrifice your happiness to maintain it." "But I would know," Brenna said, pulling away from him. "I would know that people suffered because I chose my own desires over their safety. I would never be able to live with that." Quinlan's hands dropped to his sides. "So you are just going to surrender? Marry a man you do not love and spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been?" "Yes," Brenna said, and the word tasted like ash. "Because that is what it means to be an adult. Sometimes you have to do the hard thing, the thing that breaks you, because the alternative is worse." "I do not accept that," Quinlan said, his voice shaking. "I do not accept that we have no power to change our circumstances. There has to be another way." "If you find one, let me know," Brenna said, and left the barn before her resolve could crumble entirely. She spent the next days preparing for Lord Matthias's arrival with grim determination. She cleaned the house until every surface gleamed, aired out the guest rooms, prepared menus for elaborate meals she barely knew how to cook. Her father helped where he could, but mostly he stayed out of her way, seeming to recognize that she needed the work to keep from falling apart. Quinlan remained on the property, but kept his distance. Sometimes she would look up from whatever task she was doing and find him watching her with such naked longing that it made her chest ache. But he did not approach her again, did not try to convince her to run. He simply stayed, a silent presence that was both comfort and torment. The day before Lord Matthias was due to arrive, Brenna went for a walk in the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the property. She needed space to breathe, to think, to prepare herself for what was coming. She followed the familiar paths deep into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the light turned green and gold. She was sitting on a fallen log, trying to memorize the feeling of being alone and free, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Quinlan, but instead found herself facing a stranger. He was human, middle-aged, with sharp features and expensive clothes that marked him as wealthy. Behind him stood 3 other men, clearly guards or retainers. "Brenna Oakheart, I presume," the man said, and his smile did not reach his eyes. "I am Lord Matthias Blackthorne. I decided to arrive a day early to see the property without all the formality of an official visit." Brenna stood slowly, her instincts screaming danger. "My father will want to greet you properly. We should return to the house." "In a moment," Lord Matthias said, circling her slowly like a predator assessing prey. "I wanted to see you alone first, to make sure the reports I received were accurate. You are quite striking for an orc. Good bone structure, healthy teeth, strong build. You will bear children well." The clinical assessment made Brenna's skin crawl. "I am not livestock to be evaluated, my lord." "Of course not," Lord Matthias said smoothly. "You are a potential bride, which is an entirely different category. Though I must say, your father's description did not mention your spirit. That will need to be curbed once we are married." "Curbed?" Brenna repeated, her hands clenching into fists. Tamed, perhaps, is a better word, Lord Matthias said, still smiling that empty smile. I have no objection to a wife with opinions, as long as she knows when to keep them to herself. I am investing considerable resources in this alliance, and I expect compliance in return. Every instinct Brenna had was telling her to run, but she forced herself to remain still to keep her voice level. I understand the terms of the arrangement, my lord. You need not worry about my cooperation. Excellent, Lord Matthias said. Then we should have no problems. I will expect you to move to my estate immediately after the wedding. Your father will receive an annual stipend and protection for his lands, and the other orc families in this region will be afforded the same considerations. In exchange, you will manage my household, produce heirs, and represent my interests in relations with the orc clans. It is a fair trade. Very fair, Brenna managed, though the words felt like glass in her throat. Lord Matthias studied her for another moment, then nodded. Good. Now, shall we return to your home? I am eager to discuss the finer details with your father. They walked back through the woods, the guards flanking them in a formation that felt more like imprisonment than protection. Brenna's mind raced, searching for some way out, some escape, but she could see none. Lord Matthias was exactly what she had feared, a cold, calculating man who saw her as a tool to be used, not a person to be cherished. And she was going to marry him, because the alternative was to leave her father and her people vulnerable. When they emerged from the woods, she saw Quinlan standing near the barn, and the moment their eyes met, she saw his expression change from curiosity to alarm. He started toward them, but Gareth appeared from the house, moving to intercept Lord Matthias with a bow. My lord, this is an unexpected honor, Gareth said, his voice carefully neutral. We were not expecting you until tomorrow. I hope you will forgive the intrusion, Lord Matthias said with false warmth. I wanted to see the property in its natural state, without all the preparation and posturing that comes with formal visits. Your daughter has been most accommodating. Gareth's eyes flicked to Brenna, and she saw the question there. She gave a tiny nod, trying to convey that everything was fine even though it was not, and her father visibly relaxed. Please come inside, Gareth said. I will have refreshments prepared. Actually, I must return to the village for the night, Lord Matthias said. I am staying at the inn, and my full retinue will arrive tomorrow as scheduled. I simply wanted this opportunity to speak with your daughter privately. It was most illuminating. He bowed to Brenna, a gesture that should have been respectful but felt somehow mocking, and then he and his guards were walking away, back toward the road that led to the village. Brenna stood frozen until they disappeared from view, and then her legs gave out and she sank to the ground. Quinlan reached her first, dropping to his knees beside her. What happened? Did he hurt you? No, Brenna said, but her voice was shaking. He just made it very clear what my life will be like. I am to be his broodmare and his connection to the orc community. Nothing more. Then do not marry him, Quinlan said urgently. Please, Brenna. I know you feel responsible for your family, but there has to be another way. What other way? Brenna demanded, looking up at him with tears blurring her vision. Tell me, Quinlan. How do I protect my father and the other families without this marriage? How do I ensure they are not driven from their lands or worse? I do not know, Quinlan admitted, and the helplessness in his voice broke something in her. But we can figure it out together. We can go to the provincial governor, present your case, find allies who believe in equality. We can fight this. And while we are fighting, what happens to my father? What happens to the Iron Fist family down the valley or the Stonehands who farm the Western Territory? They are barely tolerated now. Without Lord Matthias's protection, They will be driven out within a season. Gareth had approached during their conversation, and now he said quietly, "Brenna is right. Much as I hate to admit it, this marriage is the only thing standing between our people and displacement. Lord Matthias has the power to make our lives better or infinitely worse. We cannot afford to anger him. So you are just going to let your daughter be sold to a man who sees her as property?" Quinlan asked, standing to face Gareth with barely controlled anger. "I am making an impossible choice in an impossible situation," Gareth said, and for the first time, Brenna heard the anguish beneath his stoic exterior. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I do not see how it is destroying her? But I am responsible for more than just my daughter. I am responsible for every orc family in this valley who looks to me for leadership. And sometimes leadership means making sacrifices that tear your heart out." Quinlan opened his mouth to argue further, but Brenna stood and put a hand on his arm. "Stop, please, this is not helping." He looked down at her, and she saw the moment when his anger transformed into something deeper, something that looked like grief. "I cannot just stand by and watch this happen." "You do not have a choice," Brenna said gently. "None of us do." That night, Brenna could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine her future. She would move to Lord Matthias's estate, a place she had never seen. She would manage a household full of strangers, bear children for a man who did not love her, play the role of bridge between two communities that barely trusted each other. It would be a life of service and duty, with no room for joy or passion, or the kind of connection she had glimpsed with Quinlan. She must have finally dozed off, because she woke to the sound of voices outside her window. Disoriented, she climbed out of bed and looked out to see torchlight in the yard. Her heart hammering, she dressed quickly and ran downstairs. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Lord Matthias stood in the center of the yard with at least a dozen armed men, and her father was facing them down with Quinlan at his side. Both men looked ready to fight, despite being vastly outnumbered. "What is happening?" Brenna demanded, running to her father's side. "Lord Matthias has graciously informed me that he is moving up the wedding timeline," Gareth said, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "He wants to finalize the marriage tonight and take you back to his estate immediately." "That was not the agreement," Brenna said, turning to face Lord Matthias. "You said the wedding would be in the spring." "I have reconsidered," Lord Matthias said calmly. "After meeting you today, I realize there is no point in waiting. We will have a simple ceremony here, witnessed by my men, and you will come with me tonight. Your father will receive the first payment of his stipend immediately, and the protections we discussed will take effect at once." "You cannot do this," Brenna said, but even as she spoke, she knew he could. He had the power, the men, and the authority. Her father could protest, but if he physically tried to prevent the marriage, Lord Matthias could claim insult and withdraw his protection entirely. "I can and I am," Lord Matthias said, "unless you wish to back out of our arrangement entirely." "I am sure your father would love to explain to the other orc families why he sacrificed their safety for your comfort. It was a trap, and they all knew it. If Brenna refused now, she would not just be disappointing her father, she would be condemning every orc in the valley." Lord Matthias had maneuvered them into a position where resistance was impossible. "I need an hour to prepare," Brenna said, her voice hollow. "If we are to do this, at least give me that." Lord Matthias considered, then nodded. "1 hour. My chaplain will perform the ceremony and then we leave." Brenna walked back into the house feeling numb, her mind unable to process what was happening. An hour. She had 1 hour before her life changed forever, before she became the property of a man who saw her as a tool. 1 hour before she said goodbye to everything she had ever known. She was packing a small bag when she heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting her father, but found Quinlan instead. He looked wild, desperate, and before she could speak, he was crossing the room and taking her hands in his. "Come with me," he said urgently. "Right now. We can slip out the back, take the horses, and be miles away before anyone realizes you are gone." "Quinlan, we have been through this," Brenna said, trying to pull her hands away, but he held firm. "No, listen to me," he said. "I have been thinking about this all night. Lord Matthias wants this marriage because of the political advantages, right? He wants to show that he can bridge the gap between humans and orcs, that he is progressive and forward-thinking. But what if we take that away from him?" "How?" Brenna asked, confused. "By making you unavailable," Quinlan said, his eyes bright with a kind of manic hope. "If you are already married to someone else, to a human, he cannot touch you. The scandal would work in our favor. It would show that orcs and humans can form genuine bonds, not just political alliances. It would undermine everything he is trying to accomplish." Brenna stared at him. "You want us to get married?" "Yes," Quinlan said simply. "Marry me, Brenna, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because these last weeks have been the best of my life, and I cannot imagine waking up tomorrow knowing I let you go without fighting for you." "There is no time," Brenna said, even as her heart was hammering with something that felt dangerously like hope. "And there is no one to perform the ceremony. The old shepherd who lives on the ridge is an ordained priest," Quinlan said. "I spoke with him earlier. He is willing to perform a hand-fasting ceremony tonight, right now, if we can get there. It would be legally binding. And my father. The other families. Your father wants you to be safe and happy," Quinlan said. "And as for the other families, they can still receive Lord Matthias's protection if they want it, but they can do it without sacrificing you. You do not have to be the price of peace." Brenna felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in weeks, they were not tears of despair. "If we do this, there is no going back. Lord Matthias will be furious. He might retaliate against my father." "Then we take your father with us," Quinlan said. "We all go north together, start over in a place where we will not be persecuted. It will be hard, but we will be free." Brenna looked at him, at this human farmhand who had wandered into her life at exactly the right moment, and somehow convinced her that hope was not a foolish thing. She thought about Lord Matthias and his cold eyes, about a lifetime of being treated as property. And then she thought about waking up next to Quinlan, about building a life together based on choice and love. "We need to tell my father," she said, and watched Quinlan's face transform with joy. They found Gareth in the main room, pacing like a caged animal. He looked up when they entered, and his eyes widened at whatever he saw in their faces. "Daughter, what are you planning?" he asked warily. "I am choosing my own future," Brenna said, standing tall. "Quinlan and I are going to be married, tonight, and then we are going north to the territories. You can come with us or you can stay, but either way, I am not marrying Lord Matthias." She expected anger or arguments or a lecture about responsibility. Instead, her father closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I was hoping you would find the courage," he said quietly. "I have been trying for weeks to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, but every time I looked at you, I knew I was making a terrible mistake. Your mother would never forgive me for selling you like cattle." "Then you will come with us?" Brenna asked, hardly daring to believe. "I will," Gareth said, "but we need to move quickly. Lord Matthias will not wait patiently, and when he realizes what we have done, he will come after us." They moved with rapid efficiency, gathering supplies, saddling horses, packing only what they could carry. Brenna changed into traveling clothes, abandoning the fine dress she had planned to wear for the wedding. Through it all, her heart pounded with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was doing this. She was actually doing this. 20 minutes later, they slipped out the back of the house, leading 3 horses through the darkness toward the ridge path. They were halfway across the yard when a voice called out, "Stop!" Brenna turned to see one of Lord Matthias's guards standing near the barn, his hand on his sword. "Lord Matthias is expecting a wedding. Where do you think you are going?" "We are leaving," Brenna said firmly. "Tell your lord that the arrangement is off." The guard's eyes widened and he drew his sword. "I do not think so. You 3 stay exactly where you are while I fetch Lord Matthias." But before he could move, Quinlan stepped forward, his own knife drawn. "Let us pass. We do not want trouble, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." "You think you can fight all of us?" the guard sneered. "Lord Matthias has 20 armed men here. You are outnumbered and outmatched." "Then you had better kill us," Gareth said, moving to stand beside Quinlan, "because we are not surrendering." For a long, tense moment the guard seemed to consider his options. Then, surprisingly, he sheathed his sword and stepped aside. "Go, quickly." "I will say I saw nothing, but I cannot delay the alarm for long." "Why would you help us?" Brenna asked, suspicious. The guard met her eyes and she saw sympathy there. "Because I have a daughter about your age, and I would hope someone would do the same for her. Now go before I change my mind." They did not need to be told twice. They mounted the horses and rode hard toward the ridge, the night air cold against their faces. Behind them, Brenna heard shouting as the alarm was raised, but they had a head start, and they intended to use it. The ride to the shepherd's cottage took less than 30 minutes, though it felt like hours. The old man was waiting for them, a lantern glowing in his window, and he ushered them inside with quick efficiency. "You are the ones Quinlan spoke of," he said, looking at Brenna with kind eyes. "You understand that hand-fasting is a serious commitment. It is not to be entered into lightly." "I understand," Brenna said, reaching for Quinlan's hand. "And I choose this. I choose him." The ceremony was simple and swift. The shepherd spoke words about love and commitment, about choosing partnership over convenience, about building a life together against all odds. He bound their hands together with a strip of cloth, symbolizing their union, and pronounced them married in the eyes of the divine and the law. When it was done, Quinlan pulled Brenna into his arms and kissed her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than dread. She felt hope and joy and the terrifying exhilaration of having chosen her own path. "We need to keep moving," Gareth said gently, breaking the moment. "Lord Matthias will not be far behind." The shepherd provided them with additional supplies and directions to a safe path north. "There is a settlement 3 days' ride from here on the border of the territories. Tell them Father Benedict sent you. They will give you shelter." They thanked him and rode back into the night, heading north into unknown country. Behind them, the lights of the valley grew distant, and with them, everything Brenna had ever known. But Quinlan was at her side, and her father rode ahead, and she was free. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first night, they made camp in a small cave, keeping a watch rotation in case Lord Matthias's men were tracking them. The second day, they encountered a patrol of territorial rangers who questioned them about their business, but ultimately let them pass after seeing their marriage certificate. The third day, they finally allowed themselves to believe they might actually make it. The settlement Father Benedict had spoken of was called Crossroads, and it lived up to its name. It was a place where humans and orcs lived side by side, along with dwarves, elves, and other peoples Brenna had only heard stories about. The houses were a mix of architectural styles, the streets filled with a cacophony of languages, and no one gave Brenna's green skin or tusks a second glance. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a cheerful halfling woman who asked no questions and provided them with a clean room and hot meals. That first night, lying in bed beside Quinlan with her father sleeping in the room next door, Brenna finally allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning. "We did it," she whispered against Quinlan's chest. "We actually did it." "You did it," Quinlan corrected, stroking her hair. "You were the one who had the courage to choose yourself." "I could not have done it without you," Brenna said. "You gave me permission to want more than survival." They stayed in Crossroads for 2 weeks while they searched for permanent lodging and work. To Brenna's amazement, it took less than 3 days. A farm on the outskirts of town was looking for managers, and when the orc owners met Gareth and Brenna and heard their story, they offered them positions immediately. "We need people who understand what it is like to fight for the right to exist," the owner, a stern-faced orc woman named Thora, said. "And we need people who know the southern farming techniques. You will fit in well here." The farm was smaller than what they had left behind, but it was productive and well managed, and the community around it was welcoming in a way Brenna had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she could walk through town without fear, could smile at strangers without worrying about their reactions, could simply be without constant vigilance. Quinlan found work as well, helping at a local mill, and in the evenings they would return to the small cottage they had rented on the edge of the farm property. It was a modest life, but it was theirs, built on their own terms. One evening, about a month after their arrival, a messenger arrived from the south. Brenna's heart sank when she saw the sealed letter, certain it was some demand or threat from Lord Matthias. But when she broke the seal, she found a letter from the guard who had let them escape. The letter was brief and to the point. Lord Matthias had been furious at their flight, had ranted about betrayal and ingratitude, but ultimately had been too embarrassed by the scandal to pursue them legally. The story of an orc woman choosing a poor farmhand over a wealthy lord had spread through the region, and opinion had been surprisingly sympathetic to Brenna. Lord Matthias had been forced to save face by claiming he had called off the engagement himself, citing incompatibility. He had quietly withdrawn his protection from the orc families in the valley, but to everyone's surprise, the provincial governor had stepped in, issuing a decree that protected minority farmers from displacement. "It seems your defiance started something," the guard wrote. "People are talking about equality and rights in a way they never did before. You may have done more good by running than you ever could have by staying." Brenna read the letter aloud to Quinlan and her father, and when she finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. "You regret it?" Gareth asked quietly. "Leaving?" Brenna looked around their small cottage, at the simple furniture they had built themselves, at the windows that overlooked fields they tended for wages instead of ownership. Then she looked at Quinlan, at the man who had risked everything to give her a choice, and felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That spring, they planted their first crop in the Northern Territories." Brenna worked alongside Quinlan and her father, and sometimes Thora and her family would join them, turning the labor into a community event filled with laughter and shared meals. It was hard work, but it was joyful in a way Brenna had never known work could be. On the anniversary of their hasty wedding, Quinlan surprised her with a small party. He had invited everyone from the farm and the surrounding area, and they gathered in the barn that had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was music and dancing, and Brenna found herself swept up in celebration, her tusks aching from smiling so much. Late in the evening, Quinlan pulled her aside. leading her out into the fields where the young wheat was just beginning to show green. The moon was full overhead, and in its light, everything looked silver and magical. "I have something for you," Quinlan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box and opened it to reveal a ring. It was simple, made of braided silver and copper, but to Brenna, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "We never had a proper wedding," Quinlan said, his voice thick with emotion. "And we never had rings. I know this is not much, but I wanted you to have something that symbolizes what we mean to each other. You are my partner, my love, my choice. Today, tomorrow, and every day after." Brenna held out her hand, and Quinlan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and she stared at it through tears, overwhelmed by the simple rightness of the moment. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now than they had at first. "I love you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. I love you for giving me the courage to choose myself. I love you for building this life with me." Quinlan kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, and Brenna felt the last of her old fears dissolve. She had spent so long believing that her life would be defined by other people's choices, by the limitations placed on her, because of her green skin and her tusks. But Quinlan had shown her a different truth, that she had power, that she had worth, that she deserved to be loved not despite who she was but because of it. They stood together in the moonlit field, two people who had found each other against all odds, and Brenna felt a certainty settle into her bones. This was where she was meant to be. Not in some lord's manor, playing a role for political gain, but here, in this wild northern territory, where freedom mattered more than status and love was more valuable than land. Over the next year, they built their life together with intention and care. Brenna took on more responsibility at the farm, eventually becoming Thora's full partner in running the operation. Quinlan's work at the mill expanded, and he began teaching younger workers the trade, finding satisfaction in passing on his knowledge. Gareth, to everyone's surprise, became involved in local governance, using his experience and wisdom to help mediate disputes between the various communities. And then, 2 years after their flight from the Southern Valley, Brenna discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex swirl of emotions. She was happy, certainly, but also terrified. She thought about Lord Matthias's cold assessment of her childbearing potential, about how he had seen her as valuable primarily for her ability to produce heirs. But when she told Quinlan, his reaction was nothing but pure joy. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "I am scared," Brenna admitted. "What if I do not know how to be a mother? What if our child faces prejudice because they are half orc?" "Then we will teach them to be strong, like their mother," Quinlan said firmly. "And we will surround them with people who see them for who they are, not what they are. They will grow up in a community that values diversity, where they will never have to choose between their orcish heritage and their human heritage. They will have both, and they will be loved." His words soothed some of her fears, though not all. But as her pregnancy progressed, and she felt the baby growing inside her, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could give their child the kind of childhood she had never had. One filled with acceptance and joy, where they would never doubt their worth or their place in the world. The baby was born on a crisp autumn morning, with Thora acting as midwife and Quinlan holding Brenna's hand through every contraction. The labor was long and difficult, but when she finally held her daughter in her arms, every moment of pain evaporated. The baby had Quinlan's dark hair and Brenna's green-tinted skin, a perfect blend of both their heritages. Her ears were slightly pointed, and she had the tiniest hint of tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged. She was beautiful and she was theirs. What should we name her? Quinlan asked, his voice full of wonder as he traced a finger down their daughter's soft cheek. Brenna thought about her mother, about her grandmother, about all the orc women who had come before her and fought for their right to exist in a hostile world. Then she thought about the future, about the life this child would have, full of possibilities her ancestors could never have imagined. Hope, Brenna said. Her name is Hope. They raised Hope in the cottage on the edge of the farm, and she grew up surrounded by love and community. She learned to speak both common and orcish, learned to farm and mill grain, learned the stories of both sides of her family. She was confident and curious, quick to laugh and unafraid of hard work. And she never, not once, seemed to feel like she did not belong. On Hope's 5th birthday, a letter arrived from the Southern Valley. It was from one of the orc families Brenna had known, and it contained surprising news. The provincial governor's decree had held, and more than that, it had sparked a broader movement. Orc families were beginning to be seen not as unwanted immigrants, but as valuable members of society. There had even been a few more marriages between orcs and humans, relationships based on genuine affection rather than political maneuvering. You started something, the letter concluded. Your courage gave others permission to be brave. Thank you. Brenna showed the letter to Quinlan that evening after Hope had been tucked into bed. They sat together on the porch of their cottage, watching the sun set over the fields they had worked together to cultivate. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not hired me that day? Quinlan asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sometimes, Brenna admitted. But then I remember that you chose to stop, to offer help to an orc woman crying in a field. That was not random chance. That was kindness and courage, and the belief that people deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of what they look like. I saw someone who needed help, Quinlan said simply. And then I saw someone extraordinary who just needed someone to remind her of it. We remind each other, Brenna said, leaning into his warmth. That is what partnership means. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them on that desperate flight north so many years ago. Brenna thought about everything that had changed, about the life she had built through choice rather than obligation. It was not always easy, and there were still days when she faced prejudice or doubt, but those moments were outweighed by the joy she found in simple things. Her husband's laugh, her daughter's curiosity, her father's contentment, the satisfaction of a good harvest. She had been promised to a rival lord, sold like property to secure political advantage. But a farmhand had stolen her heart and given her something far more valuable, the freedom to choose her own path. And in choosing love over duty, passion over pragmatism, she had not only saved herself but had helped shift the world just a little bit toward justice. That was worth more than all the protection and status Lord Matthias could have offered. That was worth everything. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the life they had built. Hope grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who inherited her mother's determination and her father's kindness. She became a teacher, helping other mixed-heritage children navigate their identities and find pride in both sides of their families. Watching her work, Brenna often felt a sense of completion, as though all the struggles and sacrifices had been leading to this. A future where her daughter could simply be herself without apology. Gareth lived to see his granddaughter graduate from the Territorial Academy, and he passed away peacefully one winter night, surrounded by family. At his funeral, dozens of people came to pay their respects. Humans, orcs, dwarves, and others, whose lives he had touched through his work in the community. It was a testament to the kind of life he had ultimately chosen, one defined not by fear and compromise but by engagement and hope. "He was proud of you," Quinlan told Brenna as they stood together at the grave. "He told me once that watching you choose your own happiness was the bravest thing he had ever seen, and it gave him permission to be brave too." "He gave me life," Brenna said softly. "But you gave me the courage to live it." On their 10th wedding anniversary, the settlement of Crossroads threw them a celebration. It had become tradition to honor couples who exemplified the community's values of diversity and mutual respect, and Brenna and Quinlan had been chosen for the honor. Standing before their friends and neighbors, Brenna found herself thinking back to that terrified young woman who had stood in a wheat field and cried because her future had been stolen from her. "I was told once that my life had to be a sacrifice," Brenna said to the assembled crowd. "That my happiness mattered less than political stability, that my dreams were less important than other people's comfort. I believed it because I had been taught from childhood that wanting more was selfish, that safety required surrender. But then I met someone who saw me not as a problem to be solved or a tool to be used, but as a person deserving of love and choice. And that changed everything." She reached for Quinlan's hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his palm against hers. "We did not have an easy path. We had to leave behind everything familiar, start over with nothing but each other and hope. But in choosing the hard path, the uncertain path, we found something that no amount of security or status could have provided: genuine partnership built on mutual respect and love. And in finding that for ourselves, we helped prove that it was possible for others." The crowd erupted in applause, and Brenna saw tears on many faces, both human and orc. Her story had resonated because it was not unique. It was the story of everyone who had ever had to fight for the right to love whom they chose, to be whom they truly were. She had just been lucky enough to find someone willing to fight alongside her. That night, lying in bed beside Quinlan with moonlight streaming through their window, Brenna felt a profound sense of peace. She was 43 years old now, her green skin starting to show the first signs of age, her body marked by years of hard work and childbirth. But she was happy in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days before Quinlan entered her life. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly, voicing the question that occasionally still haunted her in quiet moments. "You could have had an easier life if you had not stopped to help a crying orc woman in a field." Quinlan rolled over to face her, his eyes still as warm and kind as they had been that first day. "I could have had a different life," he agreed, "but it would not have been a better one. You are my greatest adventure, Brenna Yates. You and the life we built together. I would not trade a single moment of it." Brenna smiled, her tusks catching the moonlight. "Not even the part where we had to flee in the night from an angry lord." "Especially not that part," Quinlan said with a grin. "That is the story I am going to tell our grandchildren to impress them." "Grandchildren," Brenna repeated, the word feeling strange and wonderful. "Hope will give us grandchildren one day, and they will grow up in a world that is just a little bit better than the one we found," Quinlan said. "Because you were brave enough to choose yourself." But Brenna shook her head. "We were brave enough to choose each other. That is what made all the difference." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft and tender expression of love that had only deepened with time. Outside, the wind rustled through the wheat fields, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of harvest. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds held each other close, grateful for every day they had been given and every choice they had made. The story could have ended differently. Brenna could have married Lord Matthias, could have spent her life in gilded captivity, producing heirs and facilitating political alliances. She would have been safe in a certain sense, and her family would have been protected. But she would have lost herself in the process, would have become a ghost living someone else's life. Instead, she had chosen love and uncertainty, had taken the terrifying leap into the unknown with a farmhand who had stolen her heart. And in doing so, she had discovered that true safety did not come from power or protection, but from being fully known and fully loved. She had found home not in a place but in a person, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. A family, a community, and a legacy of courage that would inspire others to choose their own happiness over other people's expectations. As she drifted off to sleep in Quinlan's arms, Brenna thought about the young woman she had been, standing in that wheat field with a sickle in her hand and despair in her heart. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, the fear and the flight, but also the joy and the love and the incredible sense of rightness that would follow. She wished she could tell her that the hard choice would be worth it, that choosing herself would not be selfish but transformative. But maybe that young woman already knew, somewhere deep inside. Maybe that was why she had taken the risk, had trusted a stranger with kind eyes and a generous heart. Maybe courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, to believe that something better was possible even when all evidence suggested otherwise. The wheat fields whispered in the darkness, the same eternal song they had sung for generations, and would continue to sing long after Brenna and Quinlan were gone. But for now, in this moment, two people slept peacefully in a cottage on the edge of the territories, surrounded by the life they had chosen and the love they had fought for. And in the morning, they would wake up and do it all again. Tend their fields, raise their daughter, contribute to their community, and remind each other every single day that they had made the right choice. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic escapes, but the daily decision to choose each other, to build a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection. That was the real revolution, the quiet transformation that changed the world one relationship at a time. Brenna Oakheart had been promised to a rival lord, but Quinlan Yates had stolen her heart first. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the freedom to be herself, fully and without apology, for all the days of her life. That was a treasure worth more than all the political alliances in the world, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for it. The story of the orc bride and the farmhand spread throughout the territories, becoming a legend told to young couples to inspire hope and courage. Some details changed with each telling, growing more dramatic or romantic as stories do, but the core truth remained. That love chosen freely was stronger than any bond forged through obligation, and that two people willing to risk everything for each other could change not just their own lives but the world around them. And in the small cottage on the edge of a farm in the Northern Territories, Brenna and Quinlan Yates lived that truth every single day, writing their own ending to a story that could have been tragic, but instead became triumphant. They had stolen each other's hearts and in doing so, had freed themselves to live fully, love deeply, and leave behind a legacy that would echo through generations. That every person, regardless of their heritage or appearance, deserves to choose their own path and their own love. That was the real happily ever after, and it was more than enough.